Alright, what's going on YouTube? Hey, I had a special request from a friend on Facebook to do a video uh, for kind of the basics of things, but not necessarily the rules and all that stuff. I guess this will be for more people that know how to play Magic but haven't really gotten into building their own decks or, the strategies of the game and things like that. So this is like a beginner's advanced guide, I guess is what we'll call it. So we're going to look at, like I said, some deck building options, how to build your own deck if you want to start from scratch, some strategy stuff, and then maybe a few with the deck building part. We're going to go into some things that you should buy or can buy, depending on where you're at in your learning to play Magic. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to look into here is deck building. And I'm going to start right here with these welcome decks. As we go through these, there's different options depending on how new you are to Magic the Gathering. If you're just starting out, maybe you just know how to play the game, but you don't have any cards, and you and a friend of yours are wanting to start playing, then the cheapest, easiest way to do that is to find your local game store or your LGS and go to one of the welcome events, and you can pick up one of these welcome decks. It comes with, like this is from 2016, so these are not current, but every open house event will have the current decks for the set that's out at that time. So if you look at these here, each of these boxes will contain a 30 card deck that has whatever color character or planeswalker is associated with that color. So this box right here will have a 30 card white deck as well as another randomly chosen deck inserted with it. So you can do one of two things. You can take one of these, split them up, each person gets a single 30 card deck, and you can learn to play with those decks. They're very basic, they're very simple, they're not going to be competitive in a competitive environment, but if you're just starting out, just wanting to learn to play the game, and you've got another friend that is also just starting out, doesn't have any cards, this is easily the cheapest way to start out. It'll give you the basics of the game, it'll give you a good grasp on the mechanics of some of the cards that are current in what's called the standard format. Standard format is an ever-changing set of cards that is current to the most currently released sets. It's very strange how they proceed through those sets and what stays in standard. So if you're interested in finding out what's in standard, go check out Wizards of the Coast website, and you can look up just Google what sets are in standard. It'll come up. You can check those out. So you can, like I said, get these welcome decks. And another thing you can do is, if you and a friend maybe aren't just brand new to the game, but you don't have any cards or anything yet, and you want to play with full 60 card decks, is you each get one of these, take those two decks, combine them together, and maybe you end up with a red and green deck and a blue and black deck. And you can play those against each other, and that'll give you an idea of how the colors work together and things like that. Now, as a step up from those, but not necessarily into that competitive layer yet, you've got the Planeswalker decks. So we'll go over here and check out the Planeswalker decks. The Planeswalker decks are 60 card decks from whatever set they're from. Like these that they're showing here are Dominaria specific Planeswalker decks. They're full 60 card decks. They come with an extra couple booster packs and a strategy guide for those decks so that you can understand how to use them. So they're also still really good for just starting out, and it's easy to play these against one another. So like I said before, if you've got a friend that's starting to play with you, or you and your wife are starting to play, you each get one of these and play them against one another, and they should be fairly balanced. Now there have been times when the Planeswalker decks were kind of out of balance, and one of them was really good and one of them really wasn't. But for the most part, they're going to play well against one another. And they usually have a 2-color format in there, so you'll get some dual lands, which are lands that will provide you 2 different colors of mana, things like that. So this is another option if you're not quite at that very, very basic stage, but you're still not really playing against competitive players. So these are good options. Other options that are similar to this will be your dual decks, which are no longer available new, but you can still buy them at Walmart. You can still buy them on Amazon, things like that. And those contain 2 decks that are specifically put together to play against one another. Me and my wife, that's what we use to play against one another because it makes her feel like it's a fair playing field, even though I'm way better at Magic than her. Like, way better. Don't tell her I said that. She doesn't watch my videos. That'll teach her. So these are good for starting out, and then another good thing about these is if you buy some booster packs or you use the 2 booster packs that are included, you can make these decks more competitive by upgrading certain cards, switching things out, and adding new stuff in. So the next option, and kind of the next step up, are a new product, relatively new, for Wizards of the Coast. They are called Challenger decks. They are ready to play. They've already got a lot of good cards in them, and there's a few different options. So you've got the Hazoret Aggro, which is a mono-red aggro deck. We'll get into aggro and control mid-range, what all that stuff means in a second. But, it's meant to be a fast-paced, mono-red deck that deals a lot of damage. And these decks are built so that they're supposed to be able to be competitive. So if you're playing with people that are already into Magic and they're already, know how to play, have built their own decks, things like that, you can get one of these decks here and probably be relatively competitive with them, much more so than if you played one of the other decks that we've talked about. So there's the mono red aggro. This one is called Vehicle Rush. It's essentially a version of the Mardu Vehicles deck that was in Standard and doing really well a few months back. It's based on 3 colors, red, white, and black, and has some synergy with the Heart of Kirin. That's one of the main cards. It's called the Vehicle Rush because there's a few vehicles in here that kind of bind the deck together. There is a Second Sun Control deck, which I believe is blue and white, and I hate Approach of the Second Sun. I got beat by this yesterday playing on Arena. But it's a card, and it exists, and it's a thing, so I guess that's okay. Approach of the Second Sun is the main card in this deck. You're trying to cast this card twice and win the game. And the rest of the deck is Control. And like I said, we'll get into what those mean later. And the last one is called Counter Surge. It's a black and green deck based on putting counters on your creatures and making them bigger and pummeling your opponent. So there's a few different options, and like I said, they're built to be competitive right out of the box, and then you can also upgrade those some to make them very, very competitive. Some of these cards are worth quite a bit of money, and it would probably be more expensive to put one of these decks together rather than just buy it. If you were to go out and buy all the individual cards, most of them I think would end up being more expensive than just paying the $30 for the pre-built deck and then upgrading it from there. So those are the kind of 3 pre-built type options that you can use to get into the Standard format. And again, Standard is kind of the current format. It contains the most recent sets, and it's always changing. As new things come out, the old stuff will drop off. So a lot of people don't like Standard because it ends up being pretty expensive because you have to get new cards every time they come out to stay competitive. So a lot of your choices here are going to be based on who you're playing with. If you're just playing at home with your wife or your friends at the kitchen table and you're not really concerned with staying within the Standard format, then any of these options will work. And there's other options. You can get on Amazon and buy pre-built decks. You can get on eBay and buy pre-built decks. You've just got to make sure that those are within the parameters of your play group, whoever you're playing with. Now, if you're wanting to start from scratch and build your own decks, the very first thing you need to do is start by figuring out what kind of deck you want to build. So there's really 4 different types of decks that all decks out there are going to fall under. First one is aggro. It's usually going to include a lot of cheap but very efficient creatures that are easy to cast, get out early, deal a lot of damage, some burn spells, things like that. There's not a lot of controlling your opponent with other spells. I mean, you're trying to make it so that you can deal as much damage as possible in the shortest period of time. And if you end up in a matchup with someone that has a way to slow that down, it can sometimes ruin that deck's strategy. But the purpose of an aggro deck is to get as many creatures out as possible, to disrupt your opponent so that they can't play what they want to play, or if they do play something, you make it obsolete. You make it so that it can't block, things like that. My wife called and I hung up on her. She's gonna be pissed. The next type of deck is a control deck. That is kind of the opposite of an aggro deck. A control deck is meant to be slower and is going to... She's going to be really mad. I hung up on her twice. Ugh. Anyway, aggro decks or control decks are going to be much slower. They're going to try to keep your opponents from being able to deal damage to you for as long as possible until you can get into some late game threats that are then able to destroy your opponent. Either big creatures that come out and deal a lot of damage, or things like the Second Sun, where you cast that spell twice and win the game. But the rest of that is control. You're going to have counter spells, removal, be able to kill off your opponent's creatures once they're already out there if you're not playing counter spells, burn spells, things like that, just to keep the board empty so that you can hold off until you can get to your end game and win the game. Kind of in between those, there's what's called mid-range decks. Those are going to usually start out with some kind of mana ramp or control at the beginning of the game, and then once you get into 4-6 mana, somewhere around there, you're going to start putting out creatures and threats that your opponents are going to have to deal with. This is more of a balanced deck that will involve a little bit of control and a little bit of creatures and a little bit of big threats at the end and things like that. So it's more balanced, and I would say for the most part, I don't know. I was going to say that it has an advantage either way, but it depends on the decks very, very specifically. Sometimes aggro decks are going to win out. I know the most recent Pro Tour event was won by a mono red aggro deck, but there's also been control and mid-range decks that have done just as well. So it depends on what cards are available and who's playing them. Finally, not used as often because it's more of a niche type. Niche. I like niche the best. You gotta have a niche for these kind of decks, or your combo decks, where it requires multiple pieces to get everything lined up perfectly, and then when it combos, you may be able to finish the game in one turn, or you get infinite turns, or you create an infinite number of Thopters. That was my favorite combo deck that I built. But it requires a lot of pieces, and if you don't get those pieces out, then your deck's not going to win in most cases. That's why it's called a combo deck, because it relies on that combo. So, again, you've got to figure out what kind of deck you want to play, what kind of player you are, and then you go in and start looking. The way I usually do when I'm building decks is I'll find a specific card that I like based off of one of the types of decks, and then build from there. So it's almost impossible for me to say do this when you're building a deck, because really it's going to be up to you. I am 100% against going on. There's websites that have like the top 8. I think that's the name of the website, top8.com maybe. I'm not sure. You can go find the most recent Pro Tour results, look at those decks, and it'll give you each and every card that was in those decks. And that's one way to do it. Some people do that, and that's fine for them. I won't do it. But that will give you a competitive deck. So again, it depends who you're playing against. The guys that I play against, none of us do that. We all kind of put our own decks together and play them against each other, and everything's pretty balanced. Now, if one of us was to go on top8.net or whatever the heck the website is and find the most recent Pro Tour winning deck and build it exactly as it was on the Pro Tour, and we'd come in and play against each other, we would probably be upset with that person because they may just absolutely dominate us. It's possible. Or we might beat them. Who knows? But in most cases, I think those Pro Tour decks are going to do better than your average Joe like me building a deck from scratch. But we have more fun, I think, by building our own decks than we do copying someone else's. So if you're playing in an environment where you need to be very competitive, that's an option. You can always get online, find really good decks, and put those together. If you're wanting to build your own, find a card you like or a color you like, and then find the best cards in that color and build around those that way. Now, outside of building your deck, the strategy aspect is going to also be dependent on you and the decks that you've got. If I'm playing a mono red burn deck, like if you look at our other videos, we did a mono red Jaya Ballard deck based off of a random card selection. If I was playing that deck, the first thing you've got to do when you're trying to determine your strategy in a game is figure out what you're playing against. So if I start playing and my opponent's pumping out a bunch of creatures, then I'm in the early game, then I'm going to determine that they're playing some kind of an aggro deck, and I'm going to try and kill their creatures as much as I can to hold them off until I can get the mana I need to... Oh my gosh, I almost died. Till I can get the mana that I need to execute my win conditions in that particular deck. If I start playing and they're not playing any creatures, that deck that I'm talking about, the mono red Jaya deck, doesn't have a lot of creatures either. So if they're not playing anything, they're probably waiting for me to play creatures so that they can counter them or destroy them. Then there's a good chance that you're playing against a control deck. And usually, I don't know if it's the proper strategy, but the way I usually try and handle control decks is just to make them get rid of their counter spells or their removal spells, play as much as I can, and then hold off until they've got next to nothing in their hand, so that then I can play into my bigger threats. If I start seeing a lot of mana ramp, and what mana ramp means, if that doesn't mean anything to you right now, is you've got things like Llanowar Elves, which is a card where you can play it and then you can tap that creature for mana just like you tap your lands. If I see that, if I see some of the other ramp spells where they're trying to get more mana, that kind of tells me that I might be looking at a mid-range or a stompy type deck where they're very quickly trying to get into some bigger mana creatures. Then I've got to adjust my strategy based on that and hopefully be able to keep their mana production down so that they can't get into those big threats. So a lot of it is you have to determine what kind of player you are, what kind of deck you've got, and you're going to know what's in your deck, so you're going to know how to adjust your cards based on what kind of matchup you see. If you're doing a best of 3 format, which in any of your tournament formats and things like that, you're going to see you'll play 3 games, or a best of 3 games. So you've got a 15 card, it's called a sideboard. So you've got your normal 60 card deck, and then an additional 15 cards that you can swap out with your and put in your deck between games. So if you find that you're up against a control deck, you might want to put in stuff to disrupt that control element. And that's with the sideboard, you want to make sure that you've got a good mix of things so that no matter what kind of matchup you end up against, you have an answer for those in your sideboard. Your main deck is probably going to be, you want to have that be as round as possible and be kind of able to go up against any type of deck, any type of threat as much as possible. And then in your sideboard, you can make it more specifically focused towards a certain type of deck depending on what you play against. And if you're just playing casually with friends, the best way to do that is you know what kind of decks they play, so you're going to build your decks based off of their play style so that you can compete against them and be successful. So the strategy aspect is kind of hard to talk because everything's so specific to the deck that you're using and the deck you're playing against. But you've got to be able to recognize those elements so that you can quickly determine what you're playing against, and that will tell you how to play the cards in your hand. And you'll know what other cards you can expect to draw. Now, obviously, there's going to be situations where you just don't get cards that you want, and that sucks, but it happens sometimes. But you know what kind of cards are in your deck, and that'll also, impact how you play the cards that end up in your hand. So I'm not going to go a lot into strategy because it's so specific to each individual game and matchup. Now, the last thing that he had asked was, like, what kind of things you should buy. So we kind of went over these decks, the Challenger deck, the Planeswalker decks, and the Welcome decks. So a lot of what you buy is going to be determined by what you start with. If you're starting out with these Welcome decks and you've just got the very basics and you're just learning to play the game, your very, very beginning of your Magic the Gathering journey, then I would recommend buying a booster pack or 2 or 3 or a handful, or you can get a bundle which has 10 packs in it, and you can, if you and a friend both have one of these, you open up your booster packs together, you trade cards, you use the cards that are based on the color of your deck, and you can make these better a little bit at a time. It'll be less expensive than going out and buying very expensive individual cards sometimes. It really just depends on, like I said, where you're starting and who you're playing against. If you know that you're going to be trying to go to Friday Night Magic and you want to have a good time, don't use these Welcome decks. They're way too basic. They're way too random as far as the cards that you're going to get. There's a lot of single cards in these decks, and you'll notice when you get into like the Challenger decks, these decks have multiple copies of the good cards that you want. So let's not jump too far. So if we're looking at the Welcome decks, then like I said, buy some booster packs, upgrade those a little bit at a time, have fun with it, trade with your friends, whatever the case may be. But don't invest a lot of money into trying to make your Welcome deck competitive, because it's going to be very expensive, and you're probably going to end up trading out every card in the deck except the lands. So then we go up to the Planeswalker decks. If you're wanting to upgrade a Planeswalker deck, it may be more cost efficient to go and buy individual cards. Or I know I've seen at Walmart, they have new products, and they're Dominaria specific color themed boosters. So you get, I think it's 30 cards or 35 cards, and they're all specific to a certain color. So if you get, let's say you get the Teferi Timebender Dominaria Planeswalker deck, it comes with 2 booster packs. You go to Walmart and you buy the white and blue color themed booster pack. Then you can use some of those cards to upgrade your Planeswalker deck, and this will be more competitive than the starter decks, but these are still not going to be Friday Night Magic or store championship decks. They're going to be better, but they're still not going to be super competitive. So I would not, again, probably spend too much money on these decks trying to make them super competitive. But if you are wanting to make them a little better so that they play better and play more consistently, then you can add cards in here to make them more consistent. Now, as far as the ultimate in making a competitive deck, you go out and spend the money to buy one of these challenger decks, and you want to play at Friday Night Magic, or you want to play in a store championship tournament, or you want to do a pro tour qualifier just for fun, or maybe you actually think that you're that good. Whatever. Some of that's going to come with time. Anyway, pick one of these decks, whichever one suits your play type the best, and you can go to your local game shop, find a good one, go in, buy specific cards that you've looked up and made sure that they're the ones you want to replace, and you spend the extra money to buy individual cards that are going to make these decks better. And there's lots of other videos. I'm not going to go into it here today. There's lots of other videos that you can go in and you type in Hazoret Aggro Challenger Deck Upgrades on YouTube, and someone will walk you through the very specific cards that you should go buy to upgrade your Hazoret Aggro Challenger deck, and make it so that it is much, much more competitive than the other options that are out there. So I would say starter decks, buy some booster packs, trade with your friends, have fun, have a good time. These are just the most basic decks, and this is going to give you a good start to learning how to build your own deck, because you're going to go through and look at these booster packs and say, okay, I could trade this out from this deck and put this in, and it's going to make it a little more consistent, a little faster, whatever the case may be, a little more powerful, things like that. So that's a good way to go about it with the welcome decks. The Planeswalker decks, using something that's a little more focused, like the color themed booster packs, instead of just going out and buying regular booster packs, is probably the way to go with these. They're a little more expensive, but again, you're trying to be more focused and make these more competitive based on the certain colors that are in these decks. So that's probably a good option that way. And then with your challenger decks, you go in and you get individual cards that are going to make these decks much more competitive. So that's the video. I don't know at all if that was helpful. I hope it was. I know a lot of it was me just rambling on. I tend to do that, and I'm sorry. But hopefully you got something out of it. You got a good idea of some products that you could go pick up and just enjoy playing. I would say if you're just starting out and you're asking for a video on the basics, then you're probably just starting and you don't really care about being super competitive. The Planeswalker decks are probably, for new players, the way to start out. They're less expensive. They can be more fun to upgrade. There's not a ton of upgrading that needs done in the challenger decks, but if you're just starting out, you can get these welcome decks or these Planeswalker decks, and there's quite a bit you could do to upgrade them, and I'm going to leave that to you. Let that be the fun part that you have. Go out, buy booster packs, buy color theme packs, and use those to upgrade your decks, make them better, have fun, work with friends and family and whoever you're playing with, and get advice. That's the one thing that I really enjoy about Magic the Gathering, is outside of the competitiveness. If you can get past that and find somebody that's willing to help you, that's been playing for a while, the community's awesome. Ask them for help online, things like that. People will help you out. Your friends that you're playing with probably will help you out. I don't know all your friends. They might be jerks. But it's supposed to be a trading card game. That's how it was developed originally. You get cards and you trade with your friends to make a deck and then upgrade it. So do that. Buy one of these, start out, then work on getting booster packs and things like that to find individual cards that you can use to upgrade and make your deck better. It's a fun game, and the only reason that I would probably not have continued playing when I first started is if I would have lost a lot. So you've got to find out who you're playing with, and because nobody likes to lose all the time. I've always said that I don't mind losing, but I don't want to lose all the time. It gets on my nerves. So find out who you're playing with, who you're playing with, and try and get one of these products that is going to make your playing experience competitive in that environment. So you may not need to go with a challenger deck. You may not need to go with a Planeswalker deck. You may be perfectly fine splitting a couple of welcome decks, putting those together, not upgrading them for a while, just learning to play the game. But if you're playing against people that have played for a while, you may need to jump right into one of these challenger decks just so that you can be competitive against them and still have a good time. So if you've got any other questions, right down there in the comments section, you can feel free to leave me questions, and I will either answer them in another video, or I'll just, if it's something that I can just answer by typing out a couple sentences, I'll answer you right there in the comments section. So let me know if you've got any other questions, if you've got any other videos you'd like to see. If I get any requests, I'll do my best to meet all requests that come in. If you need to contact us, you can, like Zach did, find us on Facebook. Just search for LMMG 2018. That's LMMG 2018. Or you can find us on Twitter at LMMG 2018 as well. Leave us comments, questions, requests for videos, things like that. We'll be happy to help. So hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I know I did a little bit, but hopefully it was all a little bit useful to you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Deuces. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, come down here and press this thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to turn on notifications so that you'll see when we post new content. If you got anything to say, hit us up down here in the comments section. We always love hearing feedback and comments from people that are watching. Let us know what you think. See you next time.